Hi everyone, it's Amanda. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be bringing you my May wrap-up. With wrap-ups like at the end of the month, I really want to be giving you guys my opinions on the books and to get your feedback back. So it's going to be mildly spoilery. I'm going to include timestamps down in the bottom. So if you haven't read these books or you want to read these books and you don't necessarily want to hear any spoilers, I mean, it's not going to be huge plot spoilers, but any spoilers, then you can feel free to click around. And if you've read these books, please just leave your comments down in the bottom. Feel free to talk to me about it, because that's what I really want to do with booktube. The first book that I read in May was The Last of the Mohicans by James Cooper. I ended up really liking this book. I think from a purely reading standpoint, I would have given it a 3 stars. It was just a very sort of adventure book where they're just out in the wilderness and they're just doing their own thing. They're rescuing the damsels in distress. But it wasn't until really analyzing the book through Schmoop, because I didn't get all of that, but it wasn't until really analyzing it that I really started to get this really deep appreciation for the book, which ended up giving me having me give it a 4 star. And it was just really interesting the way that James Cooper portrayed different characters. I know that at the time, I think this was in the 1700s. That can't be right. Oh, okay. Well, I know that at the time, he was sort of this, I want to say revolutionary thinker almost, where he was portraying the Native Americans as more sympathetic characters by his portrayal of Uncas and Chingachgook. And I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. But he was talking more about how it was harmful to the Native Americans, the way that the Europeans just came into the Americas and were just exploring and starting down their settlements and driving the Native Americans off their lands, and how they were really suffering from that. But at the same time, if you read it, you can tell that there's clearly some very racial points of view, especially where there was a common theme of purity of blood, and how that would, I guess, sort of determine the way that you act, because oh gosh, it was just really weird. It was kind of a pure white man would act differently from a pure Native American, but neither can be necessarily faulted for something bad that they do, because it's in their blood. So it's still kind of racist, but at the time, it was revolutionary thinking. Anyway, I ended up liking the book. I gave it a 4 stars with analysis, and I highly recommend reading the Schmoop analysis, and I'll link their site down below. And yeah, I really liked it. The second book that I read in May was The Clockmaker's Daughter by Kate Morton. I don't really have much to say about it, because I honestly don't remember it that much, so I guess that says something. At the time, I really liked it. I think I gave it a 4 star, but it was just beautiful writing. But at the end of the month, if I can't remember it, I guess it says something about the book. But it takes the perspectives of several different points of views, and they're all just linked around this mystery of all these artist friends going to a house, and someone gets murdered, and a precious diamond goes missing, the Radcliffe Blue, which was very Titanic-esque. I just kept thinking about it as the heart of the ocean. But anyway, one of the points of views comes from a ghost. So I don't think that's super spoilery to say, but if you're watching this, I mean, I guess you're okay with mild spoilers anyway. But yeah, I don't really have too much to say about it. I thought that the ending was mildly disappointing, because I kind of wish that we talked more about why the ghost was around, because I think that, especially with ghost stories, they need to have a point, like a reason why they can't move on, I guess. And I just didn't feel that from this book. So it was just alright. Yeah. The next book that I read was An Offer from a Gentleman by Julia Quinn. And I started the Bridgerton series as a recommendation from my friend Sarah. And oh my goodness, it's just so good, guys. It's so good. I went into it being like, I don't read romance. Like, I'm not gonna like it. Especially with, like, weird, like, you know when you have titles and they're just kind of, like, mildly embarrassing? And I get secondhand embarrassment so bad. Oh my goodness. But, because the first book was called, like, The Duke and I, and the second one was The Viscount Who Loved Me, and then now, like, The Offer from a Gentleman. And they just sound super cringy, right? Like, these, like, really, like, macho men who just, like, ripping their shirts off and is like, I'm manly, and, like, you should run away with me and become my wife. And she's like, oh my gosh, totally. But, not that there's anything wrong with, like, if you guys like romance, it's just not personally my thing. I get way too embarrassed reading it. I just, oh my gosh, it's just, like, embarrassed talk. I'm, like, embarrassed talking about it. It's just kind of, it's awkward. But An Offer from a Gentleman, which is super duper cute. It follows the second oldest son of the Bridgertons, Benedict, and it's a Cinderella retelling, and it's just so beautiful. Oh my gosh, I just love it so much. I really don't know how Julia Quinn does it, because I read her first book, The Duke and I, and it was just so great. I was like, I'm never gonna love anyone more than I love Simon and Daphne. And then I read The Viscount Who Loved Me, being like, I'm not gonna like this book. Simon and Daphne are like OTP. And then I fell in love with Anthony and Kate. I don't know how Julia Quinn did it. And then I went into the third book being like, I don't have room in my heart for any more ships. I just can't imagine that anybody's going to be like these two couples that I absolutely adore. And she did it. It was a Cinderella retelling, and I just fell for it so hard. Oh my goodness. There were parts of the book where obviously Prince Charming isn't going to recognize Cinderella immediately, and I was just screaming at the book being like, why can't you remember? It's like, that's Cinderella. It's, oh my gosh. But it was so good, and I highly recommend reading her series. They don't need to be read in order, but they're so good. Just please read it. It's Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice meets Gossip Girl, and it's so good. It's so good. So I gave it 5 stars. Yep. This month, I also read Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, and I didn't particularly like it when I was reading it. It was very sort of dry, if that makes sense. Just the protagonist, the narrator, was just very, very analytical, and it was just really, really hard to get attached to her. She was just like a very closed off person, and you could tell by the way that she wrote. I think it's also important to note that the entire story is her recollection of the events as she's recording it in a journal. So it makes sense that she's not super duper open, because technically you're a stranger reading her journal. I don't know, it was kind of weird. It was a weird setup, but I ended up, like, the more that I sat and thought about it, the more that I ended up enjoying the concepts of it, like the idea of the book. Originally, I gave it a 2 stars, but I ended up giving it a 3 the more and more I thought about it. I think it was just a really, really interesting concept, how you could have such an unreliable narrator to the point where you just didn't, like, trust anything that she said, and you couldn't trust anything that she said. The whole point of Annihilation was that they're going into this area called Area X, and you have to be hypnotized while you're, like, going through the barrier into Area X, because you just, I don't know, something about, like, the wall that, like, you just needed to protect your brain. So they were hypnotized going in, and when they went in, they kind of lost time, so that they didn't really know how they got where they were. And because of that pure fact of being hypnotized, there's also a psychologist who was able to implant certain, like, key phrases that could make you do what she wants, kind of. which is totally not okay from like a psychology standpoint. But anyway, it just made the narrator super unreliable, because then you couldn't really trust anything that was going on before she went into Area X, because her memories could have been implanted by the psychologist, since they had to go through this whole rigorous training before, and all these like psych evals before they were even recruited to join the Area X team. And so you couldn't really trust any of those memories. And then at the same time, you couldn't really trust any of the recollections that she had while she was in the area, because in the very beginning of the book, she was exposed to spores that she like inhaled. And so you couldn't really tell if she was going like crazy, if she was hallucinating all of this, or if Area X really was that weird and this really happened. So I thought that was super interesting, being like, wow, we can't really trust anything that she says. It was just an interesting topic and like an interesting concept, which is why I ended up giving it a 3 stars. I don't think that it was the most riveting sort of book, but he did a very good job building this sort of sense of dread as the book continued, just because things were going wrong, but you could never really put your hand on it, like your finger on it. You just had this sense of this sort of, I'm gonna say dread again, because there was like this danger and like people were going crazy and you couldn't really understand why. It was just slowly happening as the mind slowly unravels, and it was crazy. I ended up watching the movie after the book just to compare it, and I was kind of surprised how extremely different they were. First of all, Natalie Portman's character was a lot more open and a lot more of a sympathetic narrator, which makes sense since, I mean, we're trying to sell this movie. If she was super closed off like she was in the book, I don't think it would have been that interesting of a movie. I also thought it was really interesting that everybody in the Area X team in the movie all had names. That was a really big thing in the book, where they didn't have names. They have names, obviously, but they're never mentioned, and it's questionable whether they can even remember their names, which goes again to the unreliable narrator. So I thought that was super interesting. Also in the movie, all of the roles that the characters had were completely mixed up, other than Natalie Portman's character, who was still a biologist. Like the surveyor wasn't really a surveyor, and then, I don't know, it was just really interesting. And it ended up taking this really weird turn where, oh gosh, like I don't even know, it got really trippy at the end. You should just like watch the movie and then comment down below and tell me what you thought about it. I ended up watching different explanations on YouTube about what it was about, and it was just a trippy movie. It wasn't my favorite. So anyway, I gave it 3 stars just for the idea. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it was an interesting concept. I also read Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This is the first book in the Orisha trilogy. I think it was a trilogy. It might be just a series. I think it's a trilogy though. But anyway, I read Children of Blood and Bone, and I was kind of not skeptical, hesitant would be the better word, because it was just so hyped up on BookTube. And I don't generally tend to follow the hype, especially when it comes to like certain YA novels. A big example would be The Throne of Glass. I just really wanted to like it, but I just didn't understand the hype. But anyway, I actually ended up really liking this book. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't think it was like the bee's knees or anything, but it was really interesting. It follows this one character named Zelly, and again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but she comes from this like race, and it's not even necessarily a race, because they're all like split up in like different tribes kind of, but basically magic disappears, and then everybody who used to have magic, who no longer has magic, is basically persecuted and oppressed, and they become like the lower sort of slave class almost. And it's Zelly and her brother and the princess trying to go and find out how to bring magic back. At the same time, the princess's brother, the crown prince, is trying to stop magic from coming back because it's a threat to his rule. We also find out that he's starting to get magic, so that just makes it really complicated. I think it was really interesting. He definitely had the most interesting storyline, and I'm sorry that I don't remember his name, I just remember Sully, but he had the most interesting storyline, especially with the way that he was growing up, where he was just super, like, beaten down, and their parent was, like, really, really cruel. Like, think Ozai, like, King Ozai from, like, Avatar The Last Airbender. It was basically might is right, and you have to, like, keep power, and magic is just, like, absolute evil, and it just destroys kingdoms and whatever. So it's really, really interesting seeing him really have this, like, inner turmoil about what he wants to do. That was also a sort of complaint that I had about this book, because he ended up changing his mind a lot, and it was really kind of hard to follow that. At the same time, he started influencing Zelly, where she started thinking, you know, maybe bringing magic back all of a sudden to everybody isn't the best idea, because obviously it can be used in the wrong hands as this really terrible sort of weapon, and yeah, it could destroy, like, nations, and I don't know if the world is, like, ready for that. And so they had these, like, inner turmoils, but then they kept, like, switching their minds on what they wanted to do, whether they wanted to, like, bring magic back, or whether they wanted to not have magic. It was just ended up being kind of confusing, and I wasn't really a fan of it. I much would have preferred having a slow progression that I could follow about their different thinking processes. But anyway, I think that it ended up being really interesting, and I really ended up liking the magic system. I thought that it was really, really cool, and yeah, I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nagan. I know that I pronounced that wrong. It might be Nan. I don't really know how to pronounce it, but I hated this book, and I know that this book is, like, very polarizing, obviously. When I started to read it, I know that I saw a lot of other booktubers talk about it, and a lot of them had really strong trigger warnings for sexual assault, and I just kind of wanted to clear that up really quickly. I think that the way that Natasha Nagan, like, talked about sexual assault, it was not super triggering, at least for me personally. So yes, there is trigger warning for sexual assault, but it's not, like, super descriptive. It kind of, like, talks about the event, but it sort of blacks it out, if that makes sense. So just if, like, anybody wanted to know whether this book was something that they could handle or not, I just wanted to let you know. And then I also wanted to talk about why I really disliked this book, and it really focused around the theme of sexual assault. And that's simply because I think that sexual assault is just this huge topic, and if you're going to try to tackle a topic like this in a book, I think that you really have to, like, dig deep and really tackle it, because I felt that she was trying to be a little too respectful. And I mean, okay, maybe too respectful isn't the right word, but she kind of skirted around it almost, because I think that she tried to not be super triggering and to not have almost super strong views, but it ended up kind of backfiring, at least for me, because I felt like it was almost used as a plot point where the main character just kind of was saying, oh, here are all the reasons why I hate the king. Oh yeah, and then because, like, he raped me. And it was kind of like an afterthought almost, and I really didn't like that. I also thought that the after the event, she mildly talks about flashbacks and stuff, and obviously everybody's, like, assault recovery is different. It's different for everybody, but I felt like it was just glossed over, and I really, really wanted to connect to the main character and to, like, feel all these things that she was feeling and to go through it with her, and then to eventually lead to a place of recovery. And I just wanted to follow that journey. I think it would have been an amazing book if we had followed how she came in this one way, and was almost broken down by this event, but she rebuilt herself. Also, I think that it would have been incredible to see how she rebuilt herself with the love and support of all the other girls, because again, you're not in there by yourself. You're not the only one who was raped. There's 7 girls there with you. And I think that it was really unfortunate that you really don't get to see much of the other girls. I really didn't form any connections with them. Alright. So for some reason, my video cut out, but so I'm just gonna go back and talk about how I really wanted that healing from the assault to take place with the support of the girls around her, because again, you really can't go through something like that alone. You just can't. You have to have like a strong support. And I think that it would have been incredible to see all these other girls just band together and to really take care and love one another and to all grow together. And even if they like all got in on the attempt and the plot to assassinate the king, I think that would have been a really cool thing to do. Instead, I think that a lot of the girls were just they were just names for me. And even then, I couldn't even always remember their names. And I think that was really unfortunate, because I think there was so much that could have happened. There was just so much potential for this really, really sad and like tragic event to turn into something that was really about woman empowerment and how we need to support one another. And one of my biggest gripes about that was with Blue. I thought that she's like initially introduced as this character who's like, oh, I'm better than all of you, and this is what I want to do with my life. But then you find out that no, that's not true. She's not there by her own free will. She doesn't want to like be there and to like serve as the king's concubine. Really, nobody really wanted to be there. And I think that she could have gone from being the biggest sort of like bad guy almost, not including the king, but gone in as like a competition almost. Competition is not the right word, because nobody wants to win this competition, but just sort of this rival, this threat. And then she could have been her biggest supporter. I felt that she had so much potential, especially once you learn her background. And I really was hoping that, you know, the main character would do something about it. And that's also sad because I don't remember her name. Her name is Lay. I was also really sad that Lay didn't do something about it, that they didn't become really close to each other. The only characters that you really get to know are Lay and Ren. And while I think that that's perfectly fine, it totally makes sense, since, you know, at the end of the day, it is kind of like a romance, and they do have a forbidden romance, so it does make sense that you get to know Ren. But I was just expecting more, and I really wanted more women empowerment and turning something really ugly into a source of strength and having a support group, because I think that it's really important, especially for people who are recovering from sexual assault. So I gave it a 1 star. I ended up really not liking it for those reasons, and they're not small reasons, they're kind of big reasons. So again, I think if you're going to tackle a really difficult topic, you really need to just like go in there and really tackle it and kind of focus on it. So yeah, that was my complaint. I also read The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, and I really love the musical The Phantom of the Opera. I think that it was just absolutely fantastic. It's one of those musicals that just gives you chills like every single time. And I really, really love the film adaptation of it with Gerard Butler. I'm absolutely in love with Gerard Butler. He was like the best Phantom to me ever. Obviously his vocals aren't as good as if you saw somebody who is actually trained to be on stage, but there was something that was so raw about his voice. It was just absolutely stunning, and if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend watching it. But I read the book, and I thought that was really interesting, kind of the way that the film and the musical was adapted from the book, because obviously there were minor differences. Madame Giry and Meg were not as close to Christine as they are portrayed in the book, or in the movie and the musical. They were more they just worked there. They just worked in the same proximity. I think that the book also did a really, really good job showing the way how Eric, who is the Phantom, he never gets a name in the musical, which I think is interesting, but I mean, I guess it sort of really shows how kind of ghost-like he was. I don't know, these are not the right words. I really can't English today, but I don't know. I think it just like enhances that sort of like mystery and supernaturalness not to give him a name. But that was something that the book really did well, is that they gave him a name and they showed him like, no, he is a man. And even though he has like these really like trickster sort of tendencies that make everybody think that he's a ghost, he's just like a genius, and he is kind of really trapped within this body that is not accepted in society, which is really like holding him back from all the amazing things that he could be doing. And it just really, really showed that like turmoil of Eric's character really, really well that you don't really get to see in the musical or the movie. And I really loved it. Other than that, I think that the movie and the musical did a lot better job showing the dynamics between Christine and Eric's character, where you really got to see that their relationship was almost this sort of spiritual relationship, where she was really sort of in a trance and hypnotized by this person who was kind of preying on her vulnerabilities and saying, no, like I am a almost sort of reincarnation of your father. Like I was sent here by your father to teach you music. And it was just this really sort of like, I'm going to say spiritual. It's a spiritual sort of relationship, especially compared to Raoul, who is very sort of like there. It was physical. So it was a very different separation between, I guess, the mind and the heart. And I think that was really, really interesting. So I think that the movie did that a lot better, but I did end up enjoying the book. I think that it's definitely worth reading. I think I would give it maybe 3.5 stars. But yeah, I really ended up liking it. I think it definitely gave a lot more dimension to my favorite musical. So it was pretty good. I liked it. I also read The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and I think this is one of those books that are like heralded as one of the best, I don't know, feminist books of the time, and everyone's talking about how relatable it is, especially with all of the sort of pro-life versus pro-choice, and then the stricter abortion laws that are going on in the states at like the current time, like right now. I not like this book. I think that it could have been, I just didn't find the world very realistic, and I'm trying to like struggle with what to say about it without coming off as like too polarizing, I guess. I don't want like people to like come in to be like, wow, you hate women, and that's not what I'm trying to say at all. I think that you're following these like tales of these handmaids, and it just kind of sets up for men to be just seen as these kind of like oppressive group of people. I feel like they just lumped all these men together in a way that they viewed women as property, and that they just wanted to feel like they were in control of women, whether that was, I mean, I feel like a lot of it was just like financial, and to feel that they had a superior position to women. And I think that that's kind of a dangerous thing to do, to just lump a huge like portion of our population, half of the population, and just say, no, like you are bad, this is what you want. Obviously, because it was a dystopian novel and it kind of faces like, it focuses on the trials of women, I guess it makes sense, but it just kind of left me with like this like feeling about it, because I think that a lot of the problems today, especially with such polarizing topics, like I guess like women's bodily rights and stuff like that. I think that what we really need to work on is communication, and we need to be able to like sit down and to like come at these topics really from, I guess, like a place of almost neutrality. I don't think anyone can be like super neutral on something that they're very passionate about, but to be able to just like sit down and to hear you out and to really hear you out, to hear what you're trying to say, to understand what you're trying to say, and just to work together on it. And I think that books like The Handmaid's Tale, where you're really kind of like lumping men into this kind of terrible position, it's not something that really helps. Like, it just doesn't help with the conversation, I feel like. I also feel like it probably just like inflames and makes it this very us versus them. And when it's us versus them, we can't have a conversation. And I think that that's so important for today, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to help, but I think that people's way of helping is different, and we need to be able to talk to each other and try to find a common ground. So I did not like this book. I also think that just with the way that it was set up where it was kind of like a transitional sort of state of government, where they still remember being free and living as citizens of the United States, where women and men could like work together and women had more financial freedom. And then to suddenly go back to this almost, I don't want to say like a feudal system, but it was kind of like that, where it was very stringent hierarchies. And sorry, I was interrupted by my roommate, but you would just have these like really strict hierarchies, and it just didn't make sense for that to happen, because I think that more people would have been riled up, and it just doesn't make sense. Yeah, I don't buy it, especially when the women, like the Marthas and the wives, I can understand why the wives didn't like the handmaids, because the handmaids were, I mean, having sex with their husbands for one thing, but were also able to have children and the wives couldn't. But it didn't make sense to me for the Marthas to be so against the handmaids, especially in this sort of transitional sort of state of government, because when is it, like less than a year ago, they were like the same type of people. This could have been your next door neighbor. And it didn't make sense for them to have all of these deeply ingrained sort of prejudices just so immediately. I didn't buy it. I didn't like this book. I would give it a 1 star. I know that a lot of people love this book. It wasn't for me. Finally, the last book that I read was Two Can Keep a Secret by Karen McManus. And I feel like I can't think about the title Two Can Keep a Secret without thinking of like the Pretty Liars theme song. It's like na 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 na. Yeah, I never watched Pretty Little Liars, but I know the theme song. But anyway, I thought that this book was really, it was interesting. I ended up reading it in I think 2 days. It was a really quick and easy read. It was definitely more of a thriller mystery. I think that I've gotten in the habit of trying to figure out who did it, just to see if I can figure it out, and obviously with thriller mysteries you can't always. Also, the main character Ellery was constantly coming up with different ideas about just what her different theories were, who did it, here's why, and her theories were just so, in-depth isn't the right word either, but she just vocalized it a lot that I felt like I couldn't think of my own theories, because I was like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. And that I was kind of a little disappointed by that, but I think that was just a me thing, because I was expecting more of a whodunit. I was kind of in a whodunit frame of mind, and obviously you can't always do that with a thriller. It was alright. I wasn't a huge fan of the ending, and I don't really want to say anything about it because I feel like that's too spoilery, but I definitely did not see it coming. I honestly didn't even think about it, which I don't know if I would have thought about it if Ellery wasn't coming up with so many ideas, because I felt like she had so many different ideas that I almost wasn't able to come up with my own. But again, it's probably just a me problem. But I think it was alright. I think it was like a fun, easy read. It was kind of like a very summer read, I feel like. And by summer read, I mean something that's kind of almost like, I mean, I can't say that a thriller would necessarily be called light and fluffy, but that's how I thought about it. It's just kind of something that I read and I was like, oh, I like it. I'm probably not going to remember it in a month, but it was good. I liked it. And yeah, I think it would be a cool beach read. So yeah, for what it did, I enjoyed it. And it was like a solid three stars. Yeah. But anyway, thank you for watching my wrap up. I'm pretty sure it's going to be very long. I ended up reading a lot of books this month, which is really surprising because I feel like usually I only read maybe like 5 books, and this month I read like, I don't know, like 8 or something. I didn't count before I started this video, but it was a lot. So thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, please hit the like button down below. I would really appreciate it. Also, if you wanted to hit subscribe, that would be super duper great. And if you have any like thoughts or comments about any books that I read, or just want to tell me what you've read this month, please comment down below. I would love to talk to you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!